On BBC2 shortly, in Yes Minister, Jim Hacker's going flat out for an economy drive. And there's comedy here on One in half an hour in Brushstrokes. First, our weekly excursion into the technology of tomorrow.
Good evening and welcome live to Tomorrow's World. Tonight, Bob Symes tries his hand at some new inventions for the do-it-yourself enthusiast. Why this dam, designed to protect the city of Leningrad, is provoking a flood of protest. And how Britain's electricity industry is about to face a revolution which will affect the bills we have to pay and lead to alternative ways of producing power. First though, a recital. Here's Kate.
Hundreds of years in its evolution, the pianoforte still has one massive design fault. You can't play it with the lid shut. Until now. Wear these and you'll always have music of a kind at your fingertips. Built into the tip of each finger, but not the thumb, there's a piezoelectric pressure sensor. Just press them onto any hard surface and each finger plays a different note of a major scale. The sound comes out of a small loudspeaker built into the back. I think that finger's a bit flat. Anyway, you can play any tune you like, as long as it's only got 8 notes. Now, the designers reckon these could help children get a feel for real instruments. Well, it may be a handy idea, but there's really not much comparison.
Now that spring's nearly here, it's time I got down to some of those decorating jobs around the house. Let's see. Lining paper, paint, and a box of nails. Oh!
That's very clever, Michael. A magnetic yard broom.
Yes.
What made you think of it?
Well, I run an engineering company, and I found the company transport was constantly getting punctures due to the metal debris that we were creating ourselves. And so I had the idea of lifting it by using magnets.
That's quite neat.
Dropping the nails is simple. This handle raises the magnets inside the casing. And since the bottom plate is made of aluminium, which of course is non-magnetic, the nails drop off.
I think that's a really clever idea. No engineering works ought to be without one of those things. I wish you luck. Now, I must make tracks. There. My engine shed door painted in the colour of the Great Western Railway. Mind you, that'll take a few hours to dry. There, dry to the touch. But I know from bitter experience that if you shut the door, it may still stick to the frame. So, a Yorkshire inventor has come up with this.
A thin strip of non-stick clear film can be applied to any areas where the paint might stick, using this simple dispenser. Later, when the paint's completely dry, the tape will peel off without leaving a mark. So I can lock up my trains safely without any chance of finding a stuck door tomorrow.
Paper hanging is a tricky business at the best of times, and particularly the ceiling if you haven't any help. But I've got an extra pair of hands with this device.
Two suckers fix it firmly to the ceiling, helping me position the wallpaper for measuring or hanging.
Our parlour wanted papering and past it was waste to call the paper hangers in, and so he made some paste. He got some rolls of paper, a ladder and a brush, and with me mother's nightgown on at it he made a rush. When father papered the parlour, you couldn't see Papa paste. Dabbing it here and dabbing it there, there was paste and paper everywhere.
Well, it's not too terrible. Mind you, this device doesn't only work on ceilings, it works on walls as well. And it goes around corners because it's got an elbow in the middle, just like that. Mind you, these stickers are pretty hard to get on, but it's only a pre-production prototype. When they make the whole lot of plastic, it'll be much easier to handle. As a whole, I think it's a jolly good idea.
Not surprisingly, it was designed by a painter and decorator.
Another decorator came up with this contraption to take lumps out of wallpaper paste, but he soon realized that it's got hundreds of other good uses.
This mesh between the two chambers will strain any liquid. I'm using it to make parsnip wine.
Now this mixture is just ready for straining. Nothing much seems to be happening in here. But when I attach this pipe to here, like so, and start pumping,
The pump creates a partial vacuum in the lower chamber, sucking the liquid through from above.
there it goes. There. But it'll be at least 6 months before you can drink it. Meanwhile, I reckon I'll stick to the grape. Cheers.
Some people may have been confused recently over newspaper reports that the AIDS threat might be receding, whilst at the same time we're seeing a new government AIDS campaign.
Heterosexual transmission of the HIV virus is increasing in the United Kingdom.
So what exactly is the current position? In the early days of Britain's AIDS epidemic, the number of new cases was increasing at an exponential rate, an extremely worrying situation. But in the second half of 1987 and the first half of 1988, the rate of increase began to slow down. It's now clear that this slowing was due to a major change in behaviour in the homosexual population, which began around 1984. It can be seen still more clearly in this graph of homosexual men testing positive for the AIDS virus. There's a marked drop after 1987. Because gay men still dominate the AIDS statistics, this change in homosexual transmission rates has led government experts to reduce substantially their estimates of the growth of AIDS over the next few years. 2 years ago, the government believed there'd be 4,500 new cases per year by 1992. But earlier this year, the Day report recommended that the government should plan for a 1992 rate of about 2,000. Well, so much for the good news. Unfortunately, nobody yet knows whether a similar change to safer sex is taking place in the heterosexual population. At the moment, there simply aren't sufficient data available to provide an answer, and it is possible that there's an exponential rise in HIV infection among heterosexuals. Well, we'll soon have a much clearer idea of the spread of the AIDS virus amongst heterosexuals when the results from the anonymous random HIV testing programme recently announced by the government start to come in. And it may well be that the slowdown in the overall spread of the epidemic conceals a continuing growth amongst the heterosexuals, hence the conflicting stories and the continuing government campaign. Well, now a report from Judith in the Soviet Union.
Leningrad has so many canals they make up 1/6 of the city's total area, dividing it up into 100 islands. It's hardly surprising that the guidebooks call the city, founded by Peter the Great, the Venice of the North. But while water has brought trade and tourism to this country's second city, it's also caused devastation. In the last 3 centuries, there have been 250 major floods, which have destroyed buildings and killed thousands of people. The monument records several of those disasters, including the biggest flood of all in 1824, when the water level rose 4 meters. So in 1978, when there were 7 floods in just 1 month, it was finally decided to build a permanent protection against the Baltic Sea. The Leningrad Dam is the largest ever Soviet hydroengineering project. 9,000 workers are building this 25-kilometre shield to prevent the Baltic spilling back up the river Neva. Because the Neva has many mouths, the dam had to be built well away from the city through the island of Kotlin. As a result, it also encloses part of the Gulf of Finland. This temporary channel allows shipping through. When it's filled in, the site behind will become the engineering centrepiece. I'm standing on what will be the seabed of the main shipping gate in the Leningrad Dam. Over there is one side of the dam, and 200 meters away is the other, so that huge tankers can make their way through here on their way to the port of Leningrad. And down beneath me, they're laying the foundations for a giant tunnel that'll carry a 6-lane motorway down underneath this shipping gate and up the other side to carry on running along the top of the dam. When there's a danger of flooding, hollow steel gates will be floated in from each side of the dam, and when they meet in the centre, they'll be flooded with water and they'll sink, sealing the dam. And the hydraulic rams which operate the gates are so powerful they can break their way through a metre of ice, which will keep this dam open even in the most severe of Baltic winters. Although the dam promises security for Leningrad, it's typical of many Soviet engineering projects in more than just its size. Conceived before Glasnost, it now faces strong popular opposition on environmental grounds. The shallow waters of the Gulf of Finland are famous for their marine wildlife. There's now a fierce debate about how much stagnation will occur behind the dam when its present gaps are finally filled in. Leningrad Greens believe it's the latest serious threat to their environment. Some have even demanded that the unfinished dam be blown up.
Today we are experiencing an ecological blockade. The Lagoda has been poisoned, the Neva, the Gulf of Finland, and the air have been poisoned.
The chief engineer dismisses these allegations. The dam has had a lot of opposition. How can you be sure that it won't harm the environment?
I have to tell you that all which is serious, grand, progressive and new always has enemies. That's the first thing. Secondly, these opponents have made their attack for political reasons rather than on scientific or engineering grounds. Because all their so-called scientific and engineering proofs do not stand up to any criticism.
Faced with the inevitability that the dam will be completed, the Greens have turned their attack on these, the irrigation gates. In water just a few meters deep, these gates allow the tide to ebb and flow and are crucial in preventing stagnation. The Greens say there aren't enough of these expensive gates, but the designer argues that the key question is where they're placed. This dispute has led to some unusual tests. The tests were done on this vast-scale model. I'm standing in Leningrad at the moment, with the river Neva flowing through into the Gulf of Finland and on towards the dam. The important thing is to be able to measure the circulation of the water in every part of this model. So during the experiments, the scientists cover the surface with floating candles. A pump is then switched on, and an overhead camera records the movement of the flames as the candles are carried by the flow. This is the time-lapse picture near the island of Kotlin, just behind the dam. The long straight traces indicate a good fast flow. But near the north coast there's clear warning of potential stagnation. The surprising conclusion to those candle experiments were that these extra gates were needed right by the North Shore, with similar gates by the South Bank, to avoid stagnation and the threat to marine life. Tests also showed that this shore needs streamlining to guarantee the river's healthy flow. The engineers are now certain they've solved the problems, but the environmentalists remain unconvinced. They still think there are too few irrigation gates.
They could take the facts into consideration and modify the gates, but they won't. The officials will do what they want to do, and the scientists will do what they want to. And so the ecological threat grows.
In about 15 years, we can expect the level of the world's oceans to rise by up to 1.5 meters. At times of flood, which occur every year, the level already rises 1.5 to 2 meters. The additional 1.5 coming from the world's oceans would add to the catastrophe for our city on the River Neva.
By 1991, Leningrad should finally be safe from flooding. Only then will they discover if the candle experiments were accurate or whether safety has been bought at the expense of the environment.
Yesterday, on National No Smoking Day, the European Parliament voted for a ban on all forms of advertising for tobacco products, including the sponsorship of major sports events. But this is unlikely to have an immediate effect on policy, as most member governments remain in favour of tobacco advertising. The British government, which still receives over £5 billion from taxes on tobacco, opposed the decision on the grounds that it should be left to the individual countries to come up with a voluntary code. The tobacco lobby and advertising industry also mounted a major campaign against the motion. They described it as what they called a commercial freedom of speech threat. It's also a threat to the advertising industry. Tobacco advertising is worth over £50 million a year in Britain. Now the fear among advertisers is that the European Commission will move to restrict the marketing of other products, such as alcohol. They argue that cigarette advertising, like that for alcohol, does nothing to encourage new smokers and drinkers. It only encourages healthy competition.
This week, scientists in Glasgow announced a breakthrough in their search for a vaccine which may help prevent cancer of the cervix. Cervical cancer still kills over 2,000 women a year, in spite of the fact that it is possible to screen for the minute cellular changes which happen before the cancer develops. In the last 20 years, it has increased alarmingly among younger women, and links have been found to a common sexually transmitted virus, HPV, which causes genital warts. Working with cattle, the scientists isolated the part of the HPV virus which stimulates the immune system to reject it, and then produced a vaccine. If these results can be transferred to humans, they hope to be able to immunise young women against HPV and believe it will break one important link in the chain which leads to cancer of the cervix.
The world's most advanced all-electric car, Impact, is coming to Britain to be shown to Cecil Parkinson, the Secretary of State for Transport. With a top speed of over 100 miles an hour and acceleration comparable with a sports car, it shatters the electric car's milk float image. Any electric car's performance is limited by the need to carry large, heavy batteries. The American designers of this car claim a series of small but significant advances in motor technology have considerably improved efficiency by reducing energy losses. And because an electric car needs no exhaust system or drivetrain, its underside has been made as smooth as its upper body. This uniquely aerodynamic shape reduces its wind resistance to around half that of most cars.
This week, government scientists warned farmers that Britain is heading for a greenfly epidemic. The last such plague was in 1976, when a series of exceptionally mild winters led to a dramatic increase in the greenfly population. This was followed by such an explosion in the numbers of their natural predators, ladybirds, that even they became a pest. Again this year, the recent run of mild winters has meant that greenflies are reproducing earlier, having survived winter in the fields. To add to farmers' problems, greenfly have become increasingly resistant to a whole family of insecticides. Scientists say that the effect these mild winters is already having on greenfly is a measure of how the insect population in general is likely to increase with global warming. Just one more fly in the ointment for Britain's farmers.
On the 31st of March, our electricity industry will be radically restructured, ready for privatisation. The Central Electricity Generating Board, the local electricity boards and the Scottish boards will be reorganised into rival independent companies. It's the beginning of a period of change for the industry, driven by new competition and also by the increasing weight of environmental concerns. Only nuclear stations will remain in public hands as nuclear electric. Existing fossil fuel stations have been divided between two new companies, National Power and Power Gen. And extra competition for electricity sales will come from new independent generating companies.
This is the focal point for the new marketplace, the control centre for the national grid, where electricity will be bought and sold on a daily basis. The price you and I pay on our bill, currently at about 6 pence per unit, will be based on the prices paid here to the energy producers. From the end of March, every single power station in the country must submit bids to this control centre every single morning before 10 o'clock, offering electricity to the grid at the cheapest possible price. The grid controller, who sits here, will then select from those bids to provide power for the next 24 hours. And his decisions will not only affect the cost of our electricity, but also the types of generating stations that will thrive in the new power market.
In principle, the controller buys the cheapest power on offer, but there are exceptions. For the time being, all available nuclear power must be bought, regardless of price, which is actually about 8 pence a unit. Nuclear will supply about 20% of demand, and most of the remainder will come from the big coal stations, which will be significantly cheaper. That's partly because their capital cost has been estimated at a low value in the run-up to privatisation, and also because they're not yet subject to the latest regulations on pollution emissions, which do apply to new stations. So coal and nuclear will continue to account for almost all our needs, leaving only a limited market to be filled by new companies and new technologies as older stations close down.
The choice of station to use is also affected by the pattern of demand, which varies widely during the day, based on factors like the weather, lighting up times, even television schedules. Well, this is a pattern of demand for a typical day in March. You can see here a characteristic peak around tea time, and earlier in the day, demand can be about half that. And at these times, only the cheapest stations would be used. So, the more expensive stations may find they're only required for just a few peak hours a day.
This need for flexibility has meant the first choice for new fossil fuel stations is combined cycle gas turbines. They're cheap and quick to build and can be turned on and off in minutes compared to days for coal stations. The combined cycle system recycles hot exhaust gases from gas turbines to generate steam, which is then used to drive secondary turbines, making it a very efficient system. It's more expensive than existing coal power, but it is cheaper than new coal stations, which will be required to meet the latest pollution regulations. Until everyone has to meet the same environmental standards, independents will struggle to survive. Some new companies hope to improve their chances of survival through long-term contracts to supply power directly to local distribution companies or industrial consumers. But perhaps the best prospects for new companies are for alternative energy generation. That's because the rules designed to protect the nuclear industry will also force the grid to take some of its power from renewable sources like wind, tide and rubbish.
This is Britain's largest rubbish power generating station at Edmonton in North London. At the moment, it sells its power at the same price as power from coal-fired stations. But from April, electricity generated by burning this rubbish could sell for twice as much as power from coal. Distribution companies will be obliged to buy relatively expensive power generated from renewable energy so as to protect and encourage the alternative energy industries until they're big enough to stand on their own feet. As a result, the operator of this plant is considering a £150 million investment to treble its capacity. It would then handle over 1 million tonnes of rubbish a year. That's about 1/3 of London's domestic waste, enough to generate 75 megawatts. The Department of Energy is now considering whether to give the go-ahead for the expansion of this plant, committing the local distribution company to buying the power which it will generate. At the same time, it's also considering about another 300 current proposals for generation from renewable sources, and that could add up to 2,000 megawatts, about 5% of our national electricity needs. It's expected the government will accept about 1/3 of those bids, the ones which promise to offer power at up to 6 pence per unit. That's twice the cost of coal power, but cheaper than nuclear. If that's right, then the expansion here will go ahead as part of a massive investment into alternative energy that was undreamt of just a year ago.
The biggest of the 300 alternative energy schemes under consideration is a tidal barrage to grow across the Mersey estuary, which would use the tide to drive submerged turbines generating up to 700 megawatts. But the proposers are still striving to beat the target of 6p a unit. Another 300 megawatts of energy is being offered by 50 wind farm proposals, and about 1/3 of these could win approval. But the bulk of successful proposals are likely to involve rubbish burning, which could provide 500 megawatts of power. However many alternative energy schemes go ahead, it will be the consumer who will have to pay the extra cost of the environmental benefits. A period of preference for gas technology in new stations may soften the impact on our bills in the short term, but eventually we will have to pay the price of a cleaner industry. Now here's Peter, who I think he seems to be in San Francisco.
The miracle of modern travel, Judith. Now let's see, it's just on 12:27 here in San Francisco. Almost time for lunch. Now it's fairly easy to set your watch to a new time zone, but it's not quite so easy to change your body clock, and jet lag can leave your stomach thinking it's supper time and your head feeling like it's the morning after the night before. Well, if that's the case, then this special calculator might help. It's based on the theory that our body clocks are controlled by the effect of bright light on an organ just behind the eyes called the pineal gland. Subject the pineal gland to the right pattern of light and dark after you complete your journey, and, so the theory goes, jet lag should be a thing of the past. Now suppose I'm leaving San Francisco tomorrow morning at just 9 o'clock. I first of all have to enter my departure time, and then I enter the duration of the flight itself, and then I put in the time of arrival. In fact, I've gone one too far here. So after putting in the time of arrival, have we got time just for me to see if I can run through that once more? I'm told we have. Right, departure time, flight duration time, and then my arrival time, which is 5 in the morning in Gay Paris. Then, this is where I should have done it, we find out whether we're going east or west. I tell it we're going east, and now it is calculating when I'll need to go out into the light and when to stay indoors, and there it is. Right, well, now I have arrived in Paris, and it's 5 in the morning. And this says that I have to stay indoors in the dark until 9 o'clock, and then go out into the sunlight of the Champs-Élysées for about 6 hours. But what can I do for the next 4 hours that's in the dark? Yes, well, that's all we've got time for this week, so we'll see you again next Thursday at 8, I think. Good night.